Hi, this is Pastor Ken, and I'd like to talk to you on the subject, when church services are interrupted. Now, this is based on the incident that came out of St. Paul, Minnesota, with City's Church on January the 20th, 2026. Interrupt. Inter, between. Rompere, to break. Between breaks, interruption. So the scriptures do tell us of a few places where there were interruptions, and I'm going to tell you that there was a godly one, and that would be Jesus and the temple. When he went in and overturned the money changer's table, and how he drove out the animals with a rope or a whip, and declared that this is Father's house, a house of prayer, but they have made it a den of thieves. So this was a very good interruption in church life, in Matthew chapter 21 and John chapter 2. Another interruption is Acts chapter 20, where a man is overcome by fumes, falls asleep, and then falls from the third-story window. He is dead. But the apostle, by the power of the Holy Spirit, will raise you to kiss from the dead. So that was quite a church interruption right there. Now, of course, the one that is most relevant to this topic in regards to this incident in St. Paul, Minnesota, is Mark chapter 1. Mark chapter 1. And they were astonished at his doctrine, for he taught them as one that had authority, and not as the scribes. And there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, saying, Let us alone, what have you to do with thee, thou Jesus of Nazareth? Art thou come to destroy us? I know who thou art, the Holy One of God. And Jesus rebuked him, saying, Hold thy peace, and come out of him. And when the unclean spirit had torn him and cried with a loud voice, he came out of him, and they were all amazed. So we see an interruption by an evil spirit. Now, in my 42 years, I have basically witnessed only 2 interruptions on Sunday morning. The first one was a medical interruption, and that is, I was in the middle of preaching sermon, and the member of the church down in front was starting to go sideways as if he were going to sleep. And that didn't bother me too much, but when he fell off the pew and onto the floor and was unconscious, then that concerned me. So we stopped the service and we rushed down to see if he was okay. We had nurses in the congregation. We're trying to talk to him and minister to him. And then eventually we called the ambulance, and he was removed from the sanctuary. And the service basically ended in the middle of the sermon. Now, it was a medical emergency, and we didn't know what had happened. But what we found out later was that this man wasn't sure if he had taken his blood pressure medication. So he went ahead and took another pill. And he did take it, and then he added an additional pill, which caused him to black out. Now, people on blood pressure medication are warned, if you are not sure whether you've taken it or not, don't take another one. And that's why. Now, this man passed out in the middle of service, and I dismissed the service in the middle of the sermon. I can't remember if the offering was taken before the sermon or after the sermon. I think it was taken before, so the offering had been received. But there are medical interruptions, and then there are evil interruptions. Of course, the other thing I should say, there are natural interruptions, like if there's an earthquake or a flood or a bad storm or a power outage and so forth. So these are not the kinds of things that are drawing attention to people in the video and in the discussions that are going on right now. But we'll just call them evil presence interruptions, demonic. Evil presence interruptions, demonic, based on Mark chapter 1. And that's what took place out in St. Paul, Minnesota, in the city's church. Now, what you probably don't understand, and it's hard to convey this because most people want to believe that, quote, the news is just being reported. And they never consider the idea that the news is being created. In other words, there are professionals involved in terms of causing something like this. So the one video I would recommend that you go to is called "Professional Agitators Are Behind the City's Church Attack." And the channel is Center for Baptist Leadership. Now, I may have some videos out on what's called the Hegelian dialectic. I'll try to maybe make some more in the future. And it's hard for people to understand this as well. Another thing that's hard for people to understand is that that propaganda is completely and totally legal in the United States, and that you cannot trust any news source or any news story. And that might include my channel and me. And you can go on my my search box, and just type in propaganda, or type in Smith-Mundt, M-U-N-D-T, Modernization Act, and you will see that everything is controlled by a board, and the board is appointed by the President of the United States, and that indeed it's government regulated. Now, that's the one thing that people will refuse to believe. And I give you the references to look up. Many people don't look them up. Many people don't do what I say. But you can actually go to source documents and not to some web page or some channel and look up the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act and NDAA 2013, Section 1078. Now, if you're confused about it, just go to my search box and type in propaganda, type in Smith-Mundt Modernization Act, and some of my other videos will turn up for you. So, most likely, this is just a created story by professional agitators and actors. But if you don't want to believe that, you want to sort of like protect your church, there's another place you can go, and it's called Christian Warrior Training. That's the name of the channel. And he talks, on the name of that video is Growing Risk of Protest Disruptions during church services. So this is a man that was in law enforcement, and he wants to try to give you the best advice possible on this type of thing and preventing it in your church. Now, in my 42 years, like I said, I had 2 interruptions, and the first was just medical. A member of the church that took an additional blood pressure tablet, and it caused the individual to pass out. The other incident involved a situation where there was pilfering in the church. There was theft. And it's a little bit complicated, but if you listen to some of my other videos, I tried to talk about private confrontation when there's questionable behavior, particularly regard to financials in the church. So this particular individual had taken offerings and never turned them in to the church treasury. They were offerings taken at a something like a Bible school program, and over a period of 2 years or so, I would say they would have amounted to maybe $10,000. Not sure the exact figure, but they were never turned in. The individual had also talked the leaders into getting a credit card, the name of the church. In other words, it was a church's credit card. And this woman was purchasing things privately for her family on the credit card. So I went to the woman and I said, we need to sit down and talk, and it will be confidential. There will not be anyone else present except the treasurer. And we promise you that we will not speak of this to anyone. Well, of course, she never showed up. And what she decided to do was on a Sunday morning, just as service was ready to start, she stood up and started to go into a fit and accuse me of accusing her of theft when she was perfectly innocent. And she was yelling and screaming, and she was using nasty language, and she was doing it in front of the entire congregation. Well, I wasn't sure exactly what to do, so I just basically tried to reassure her that after the service, that the leaders of the church would sit down with her without me present, and she could go ahead and give to them her grievances. Well, that wasn't good enough for her, and she continued to yell and scream and stomp on the floor, and immediately the atmosphere changed. Now, there were grown women there, and I would say they were in their 70s and 80s, who actually began to cry instantly. And they were weeping because of what they were witnessing. And this woman, of course, didn't stay for the service. And she didn't meet with the elders or the leaders of the church afterwards, but had an escape vehicle ready, almost like in the movies. When there's a bank robbery, you have somebody with an escape vehicle that's running and ready. So she took off and tried to tell everybody that, you know, charges were made against her. And nobody made any charges. And the only thing that she was asked to do was sit down and account for the offerings that were missing and account for the inappropriate activity on a church credit card. Well, now it's hard to convey this to you through camera, but the level of anger that was shown was such that if this individual had access to a firearm, there could have been a possibility that the individual would have used the firearm on me. That is the level of anger that was observed on that Sunday. Now, it was a terrible thing that happened, but it was an interruption because she left and then we had the church service. I mean, I made it very clear she was more than welcome to sit down with all the leaders without maybe even being present and air her grievances. Of course, she never did. Now, what is the end of the story, like Paul Harvey would say? Well, the end of the story is that yes, she was pilfering. And yes, she was misusing a church credit card. And I don't know the exact amount, but I could only roughly estimate for about the last 2 years, maybe $10,000. But I had great suspicion that it went back many years. And so the actual amount would have climbed even higher and higher because of the various tricks that she pulled. And one of the tricks that she pulled was she told the ladies group that the children needed help with the admission into this program. And so she had the ladies group write her a check to cover their admission into the program I was telling you about. And she did that every year. And so that money was gone because it never went to the admission for the children in the youth program that we conducted that was like a Bible school program. So what am I really trying to tell you? Can a church service be interrupted? Yes, it can. And it can be interrupted sometimes in a good way, but many times it's in a bad way. Many times it's exactly what we read about in Mark chapter 1. It's the demonic element that wants to destroy worship. It's a demonic element that wants to slander godly preachers. It's a demonic element that wants to come in and cut your congregation in two so that indeed it will fall. It's a divide and conquer tactic. So what really happened in Minnesota? Most likely, you witnessed a paid agitators to come into a church that was unaware of what was going to happen. And what would my advice be? Well, basically, my advice would be every leader and every member needed to just remain calm and quietly and as best as possible ask them to refrain and leave. And if they did not, then so be it. Let the demons manifest. However, the name of Jesus could be brought out too. And then we would see something maybe quite different if it would have turned into that direction. Notifying the police, yes, of course. This comes under what's called disturbing the peace. And that's always been a violation. Now I understand there are laws in place that do not permit this type of thing in a church under state laws and federal laws. But even just under local laws, violating the peace, disturbing the peace. So the whole thing has been blown up, maybe intentionally so, because of what I'm going to tell you, the Hegelian dialectic, that is to stir up the population of the United States and divide and conquer all of us through making incidents to the point where you're either on A or B. And A won't talk to B, and B won't talk to A. So the whole nation gets divided. Now, this is just one particular incident. And that application of what I'm telling you applies in many directions. And I could go on and on and on about it, how it applies. But let's just see this as the incident in Mark chapter 1, whereby the man with the unclean spirit cried out, "Let us alone! What have we to do with thee, Jesus of Nazareth, who come to destroy us? I know who thou art, the Holy One of God." And Jesus rebuked him. "Hold thy peace and come out of him." Now, that's probably what the camera should have shown.